media. So stay tuned on our social media. Thank you. Thank you Mbak Ocha.
Thank you. Sosial medianya mungkin bisa you can wrote in chat ya, Tatski.
Oke, oke.
Sosial media IG atau Twitter dan lain.
Siap.
Thank you. So Mr. Ernowo, is your time to moderate the venue. Thank you.
Terima kasih Mbak Ocha. Good afternoon everybody. Welcome and thanks for joining our today's SASAMI. It's great to see you all here by this Zoom application. He already present with us, Dr. Tobias Schiegel. Before his talk, I would like to introduce him first. Dr. Tobias Schiegel was graduated from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, or known as ETH Zurich, Switzerland. Currently, he works as research scientist at the division of CSIRO, Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization in Kensington, Western Australia. Working at CSIRO, Dr. Schiegel worked as a full-time postdoctoral researcher at the Institute of Mineralogy and Economic Geology, RWTH University, Germany. At that time, he helped me with lots of discussion. Thanks, Toby. He does research in geochemistry and geology of mineral system with focus on fluid rock interaction. Many papers have been published in reputable international journals related to iron or copper deposit types, especially from Olympic Dam and Prominent Hill, where he completed dissertation research. His most recent publications is Fluorite as indicator in iron oxide copper gold system, explaining the IOCG deposit diversity, which published in the Journal of Chemical Geology at 2020, this year. Okay, today he will give us talk about the topics with the title of IOCG Alterations, fluids, and how we can trace the fluid source using fluoride as proxy for the origin of IOCG fluids. We have time until 5 p.m., Dr. Schiegel. And for the participant, you can write down your question during his talk in the chat room, and we will discuss it later after he finishes his presentation. So, Dr. Schiegel, the time is yours, please.
Thank you very much. I would like to welcome everyone to this talk. I'm very thankful for the invitation from your organization to give this presentation today. And I will sort of talk about iron oxide copper gold deposits. And let me share the screen. So screen one, share, and you should see now the presentation, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so I will sum up sort of the research that we have conducted at the ETH and at the RWTH during the last 10 years. So, and that's with the title Iron Oxide Copper Gold Alteration, Fluids, and how we can trace the fluid source using fluoride as a proxy for IOCG fluids. First of all, I would like to start with acknowledgement, because many researchers and consultants and people from the industry have contributed to this research. I won't name all of them, but here is pretty much the entire list. Okay, the study was funded mainly by the Swiss National Science Organization, and later parts were funded by the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft. So that's the equivalent of the in Germany. It's a research funds. I would like to start briefly and with this diagram, and it shows you the the reported resource in million tons versus the copper grade. And the question is, why should we care about IOCG deposits? We should care about them because they show great economic attraction for minerals explorers, simply because they have high copper grades. So we see here, well known for in Indonesia, Grasberg porphyry deposit, okay? And then here, a range of grade and tonnage resources for typical porphyry copper deposits. What is the take-home message from this slide is that IOCG deposits typically contain or show higher copper grades. And so that makes them really important in exploration, simply because as we go underground all over the world, the chance for higher copper grades makes underground mines more valuable. I will start this talk with a little synopsis of IOCG deposit features, just to bring everyone on the same page. Then we go into the iron oxide alkali calcic alterations. I will use two examples from very well-known deposits, which one is Olympic Dam and the second one is Ernest Henry. And then we dive a bit more into the geology of South Australia, where Prominent Hill is located. And then finally, we look at the fluids responsible for mineralization, and then we go into the application using fluorite. So the synopsis on this slide shows that the characteristics of IOCG deposits. And so all IOCG deposits, they show abundant magnetite or hematite, and if they're not IOCG deposits. The mineralization is structurally controlled, and it's typically this cold mineralization hosted in breccias, veins, and in large replacement bodies. Very important is that these mineral systems show zone sodic, calcic, potassic, iron oxide alteration. They show a scarcity of sulfides, so there are not many sulfides around, and the origin and nature of sulfur is highly debated as well, but we will not go into this topic. I will start with this image. So we have two images. On the left side, we have a high-grade ore breccia from Olympic Dam. We see lots of hematite in steely gray, a few clasts, okay, and then chalcopyrite here in yellow, intergrown with fluorite. On the other hand, on the right side, we see a magnetite breccia from the main ore shoot at Ernest Henry. And we see all the red parts are K-feldspar altered clasts, okay, and the mineralization sort of chalcopyrite sits in the breccia matrix, same as at Olympic Dam. So mineralization sits in the hematite or magnetite breccia matrix and is sort of surrounded by variably altered clasts. This picture is from Prominent Hill. It's a hematite breccia. Okay, we see lots of clasts, partly hematized, and that you don't see any copper sulfides here because they're hidden in the breccia matrix. But I show this picture to illustrate a common conundrum in IOCG deposits. So whether they form by hydrothermal brecciation and infill of hematite and chalcopyrite in the breccia matrix, or whether this rock has been a breccia before and we see hydrothermal replacement. And as you see here now, we see a clast, right? So if only hydrothermal brecciation and infill would occur, then this clast would not have been partly altered. So what we see is a partly or chemically reacted clast that starts to diffuse in the breccia, and it's disintegrated at this place. So this indicates that much of the hematite alteration is a replacive process and not necessarily a hydrothermal process and hematite infill. So towards the end of this talk, I would like to answer the question, how can we explain the formation of copper-rich IOCG deposits? And what you see here is a microphotograph of a hematite breccia which is highly mineralized. So these are all copper sulfides, bornite, digenite, edite, and so on. And with lots of hematite, okay, some siliciclastics, and lots of porosity. So they're really permeable hematite breccias. Now I jump into the alteration, and I'm going to use an example from the Olympic Dam IOCG deposit. So what we're seeing, Olympic Dam is hosted in the on the Gawler Craton in South Australia. And I will use examples from Olympic Dam, Ernest Henry in the Cloncurry, and Prominent Hill. On this sort of thing, it's to illustrate sort of the simplified geological map at the basement unconformity with the hematite, with the Olympic Dam breccia complex, and where the mineralization sits. And with the next couple slides will show you a cross section that goes through these samples, or to these drill holes. So it's a couple kilometer cross section, and we will look at the zonation, or the alteration zonation around the deposit. So we see here the Olympic Dam breccia complex with hosting the copper ore with a 20% iron, 5% iron line, and biotite outline. And what we see here is sort of the abundance of sericite, so white mica in the core part, and outside you see K-feldspar dominating over sericite. And below here is a representation that was published by Morgan, where the copper sits. And now we are going into the zoned alteration of the Olympic Dam as it was published by high logger data. So we see again the copper, okay, sitting here in the Olympic Dam breccia complex, and the distribution of alteration minerals with respect to the ore deposit. So we see the copper is associated to muscovite and phengite, and important here is so the iron and magnesium chloride show sort of alteration envelopes around the deposit. And we see it is a transition from muscovite, phengite to chloride, and then into relatively least or less altered Proxy Downs granite with microcline and albite. If we zoom into the deposit, we see the mineral zonation as calculated from multi-element assay data. And so this is and these are images from Katie Ehring and Luis Goribo. The images are from BHP and it's published in the short course notes in last year. So what we see is a central zone of high-grade hematite, where also the barite sits. And then as we go outside in the deposit, we see that sericite kicks in, okay? The central part are actually sericite-free, so that has been leached out. And as we go out, we go towards fluorite, siderite, and then at the outer boundary, K-feldspar dominant regions. So we see a typical, or a relatively nice mineral zonation from inside towards the outside. This brings me to a first little summary diagram illustrating the general zoned iron oxide alkali calcic alteration pattern as we see at Olympic Dam, and this image is published in our latest paper. So we will sort of use these images and construct the final diagram. This is basically what I just shown as a summary diagram based on these publications. And now we jump into Ernest Henry, and these images come from Mark et al., published in 2006, and they show the alteration distribution at Ernest Henry. So Ernest Henry sits at the eastern part of the Mount Isa block, okay. Over here, it's also covered by younger sedimentary rocks. And what we see is it's sort of a time mineralization diagram. We see early albitization and sodium calcic alteration predates the economic mineralization, and the economic mineralization, the magnetite breccia, is hosted by an envelope of potassium feldspar albitized and potassium feldspar altered meta-andesite. So this is again the summary diagram illustrating the key alteration mineralogy for Ernest Henry. Now, so that was sort of two examples from which I have just summarized from the literature. Now we dive into a bit more into my area. So that's the history or it's a mineralization history of prominent hill. And this image shows you sort of the geology of the Eastern Gorman Crater. So we are located in South Australia, and here on the left is shown the Olympic IOCG province. It's currently hosting 4 iron oxide copper gold deposits with prominent hill, Olympic Dam, Carapatina, which is going to be start mining by the end of the year, I think, and then Hillside. What is important here that there is also a number of iron oxide copper gold prospects. They're currently sub-economic. They contain a bit of copper, but there are no deposits. If we look at the general geology, we see from young to old, we see calcareous metasedimentary rocks here in the eastern part, and they are intruded by the Hiltava sweet granite and the comagmatic color range volcanics forming a large igneous province. And the IOCG deposits sort of form typically around the eastern part of this magmatic event. So if we focus in the north part, we see prominent hill here sitting between metasedimentary rocks in the north and unmetamorphosed sedimentary rocks and color range volcanic equivalent lavas. So the northern part has been trusted over a foreland consisting of sedimentary rocks and lavas. And now we will look at now you see an image of the prominent hill pit that's taken in 2008, and it shows the main 3 rock units. So in the north, we have metasedimentary rocks. The carbonates, carbonate peelite, dollostones, and calc-silicates, and these rocks are altered to a magnetite pyrite skarn-like mineral assemblage. So it's not a proper skarn because they don't show garnets, it's a skarn-like carbonate replacement mineralization. It's important that these sort of skarn-like mineral assemblage contains only subeconomic copper. The deposit is hosted here in the footwall to this fault zone, and it's mainly hosted in sedimentary rocks, calcareous matrix-bearing siliciclastic breccias, argillites, dollostones, sandstones, and separated by an unconformed equivalent lavas. And these are amygdaloidal lavas, lava flows, basaltic, andesite, and dacite. The important thing is, so as you see in red, these are the hematite breccias. They are extending from west to east, sort of. And the hematite aluminosilicate breccia, so hematite breccia that contains stable aluminosilicates, they host the copper ore, and the hematite quartz breccia here in the center contains the gold ore. This image shows a very simple cross-section through about this region here. So we see the magnetite skarn in the north, separated by the hanging wall fault zone, separates the host rock sequence consisting of dollostone and sandstone, siltstones, etc., and the color range volcanic equivalent rocks in the very footwall. In between, you see the hematite breccias, and as I said already, hematite quartz breccia contains the gold ore, and hematite aluminosilicate breccia contains the copper ore. Mineralization occurred via infill of copper sulfides into the porous hematite breccia matrix and via replacement of early pyrite, which is an important thing. We'll come to that. So let's have a look at the host rock, at the prominent hill sedimentary host rock sequence. So what we see, these are images from the region. So what we see an overturned sequence of interbedded marine sedimentary rocks, carbonate cemented breccias, gray rockies, okay, here sandstones, and then platform carbonates, and then there's the unconformity, and then the footwall volcanics. So these are tectonic breccias. They have not much to do with hydrothermal brecciation. And in some literature, IOCG, many authors, they push, or they not they push, but they have has been related as hydrothermal brecciation, but these images show actually that it's a tectonic brecciation that predates hematite alteration and mineralization. Let's make a quick breccia comparison. So what we see here are hematite breccias from the mine sequence, okay, compared to the host rocks in the region. And what we see is that the carbonate is basically replaced by hematite, and that creates the hematite breccia. So both breccias show budinaged argillite sequences or argillite layers. Okay, here it shows the budinaged layers. Then we see that we have calcareous or cemented breccias which are replaced by hematite. So the carbonate has been replaced by hematite, and the clast have been affected partly, sometimes not. So now, if we go back, it was not clear whether the alteration takes control on mineralization or whether the distribution of lithologies controls the distribution of copper mineralization. So what we did, I was given a large or a mine scale assay database containing X multi-element assay data, and we sort of tried to plot up to see whether there is a host rock or an alteration control. So on this diagram we see a range of sedimentary host rocks, okay, and the chemical signature, okay, and then in theory, elements such as aluminium, titanium, zircon, etc., they should or are considered immobile, so their ratios should not have been affected if you just deposit hematite in the breccia matrix. So the ratios of the immobile elements should be used as a tracer for the lithology. And if we look at this distribution of data, so every point is a 1 meter interval, and we see that the sedimentary host rocks, they show basically the same composition in this diagram, but the sandstone shows two clusters. And we will focus on the sandstone in this diagram here. So what we see is the sandstone colored to is aluminium over titanium ratio. So it's colored according to the value. And here on the right side, we see a plan view, and plotted are all drill holes that are logged as sandstone. So only sandstones, and the holes here, they are other lithologies or the hematite breccia. What we see that the sandstone composition shows a spatial compositional variation. So, for example, here we have the aluminium-rich sandstone, and in the center we have the aluminium poor sandstone. So now I circled this because you will not find a sandstone in the literature which has an aluminium-titanium ratio of 1. Okay, so all sandstones have higher values. So what we see here is basically the effect of intense alteration. So we see an area where really intense alteration has changed the chemistry of the sandstone. So let's have a look what the alteration does to the second part, the second host rock units, to lavas. And we on this figure we see a number of little pictures of an andesitic lava flow hosting mineralization, some mineralization, but the pictures come from a prospect south of Proxy. But what we see is a least altered andesite, and as we go downhole, we see increasing alteration, increasing hematite alteration, which is not accompanied by hydrothermal brecciation. So what we see is a pervasive replacement and increasing texture destruction by pervasive replacement and hematite input. So if you consider within 10 meters, the appearance of the lava flow changed completely. And if you would only see this image, you would say, well, that's a hydrothermal breccia. But in fact, it's a replacement. And look at this here, for example, you see the phenocrystals of plagioclase, which are altered to chloride, and then within a centimeter, the texture is completely destructed. And now, the next diagram shows you the chemistry of these 6 samples. What we did a normal mass balance alteration, a mass balance calculation, and we see, so least altered rocks are on the left side and highly altered rocks are on the right side. And we see the changes, the mass gains and mass losses during this alteration. And we see that for a large part, titanium, quartz, and aluminium are intense hematite quartz alteration leaches some of the immobile elements, or leaches some of the elements which are considered immobile. Okay. On the right side, we see with a photomicrograph what's actually happening. We see that the hematite, it's a sandstone, we see that the hematite replaces chloride and sericite in the matrix. And that's why we lose our aluminium and magnesium and manganese, etc. How are we doing with time? 22 minutes. Okay. So this image shows then we took all the data and drawn a geological map based on the chemistry. And what we see is the distribution of these lithologies, or chemically defined lithologies, in colored, and then the copper grades plotted on top of it. We see that the copper grades cross-cut lithological boundaries. Okay, so there is no really alteration control on mineralization. What we also see is this aluminium poor hematite quartz core, and we could not trace the lithology in this part of the deposit because the aluminium was totally leached. So this is sort of the alteration residue. And the copper nicely warps around this alteration residue consisting of hematite quartz and barite. This image shows is this cross, so we're going to look at the cross section here, okay? And what this image shows here is the distribution of 2 types of hematite breccia. We see the logged hematite breccia has 2 types. Black colors are the hematite aluminosilicate breccia, and the red ones are the hematite quartz breccia. And these drill core logs are plotted on the distribution of this ratio. This ratio is a proxy for hematite quartz alteration. And we see that high ratio, or high values of this ratio, they correlate with hematite quartz breccias. So what we developed is a tool to map hematite quartz alteration. And we see, so when the ratio goes up, then you have a clear kink. So the red parts are basically the hematite quartz breccias. And this ratio sort of tells you chemically what they are. On this diagram, you see 2 block models. So the distribution of the hematite quartz alteration as indicated by the hematite quartz alteration index. And we see nicely now that the copper occurs in zones that do not show hematite quartz alteration. But these zones where the copper actually are located are zones that show stable white mica. So remember, potassium over aluminium ratios of 0.33 is sericite, K feldspar would have 1, but the copper is hosted in rocks that show stable white mica. So that translates into that the copper is hosted in zones which are not highly altered. So this sums up basically the alteration. So we see that the copper sits out that the gold sits inside the zone of intense hematite quartz alteration, and the copper sits immediately outside the zone of intense hematite quartz alteration in rocks that contain stable aluminosilicates, so white mica, chloride, etc. And as I go further out into the proximal, into the medial and distal alteration footprint, chloride and feldspars become stable or remain stable. So let's have a look at some copper sulfides. And I introduced at the beginning that IOCG deposits show a scarcity of sulfides. So that means the host rock contains already pyrite, and the copper mineralization sort of overprints or uses the sulfur of these early pyrite. And this is what's shown in this set of photographs. So we see early pyrite at Prominent Hill, which is replaced by copper sulfides. So the mineralization, bornite, chalcocite, they suck up the sulfur. So pyrite is providing the sulfur for mineralization. And that's a key observation for Prominent Hill, but also at Olympic Dam. So we see a pyrite which is replaced by chalcopyrite, pyrite replaced by bornite and chalcopyrite. And when the pyrite is completely used, then we see no pyrite left. And that's the highest grade copper ore at Prominent Hill and also at Olympic Dam, or at least parts. So now we are approaching sort of the core part of this talk, and we need to talk about the mineralizing fluids in IOCG deposits to conclude the fluorite vector. So in the early, or I'd say in the 90s and 2000s, many researchers have studied iron oxide or IOCG fluids. And they came up, there was quite a bit of a dispute. Some people were saying the mineralizing ore fluids are magmatic hydrothermal fluids. Others said, no, they're sedimentary brines, so fissile fluids. Others said they're rock buffered basement brines or metamorphic brines. And the question really is here, so who is right? Okay. And towards the end of the talk, we will see that everyone was right. Okay? But the dispute is still going on, but the dispute doesn't help. And this talk will show that IOCG deposits can form by mixing of several types of fluids. So we did quite a large fluid inclusion study from Prominent Hill fluids, and we determined that samples show basically three types of fluid inclusions. So there are liquid vapor type fluid inclusions. You see here the liquid with a little vapor bubble. Then we have liquid vapor type fluid inclusions with an additional solid as a daughter crystal. And then we have liquid vapor halide type fluid inclusions. So we see here the nice cubic halide crystals. And sort of these are the three main types of fluid inclusions we see at Prominent Hill. Important here is that not every fluid inclusion type occurs in all samples. So the mineralized fracture matrix contains mainly these two types, whereas the halide-bearing fluid inclusion types, they occur in siderite-bearing veins. Okay. This diagram shows you two things, or a couple of things actually. So we go through it. It's relatively complex, but we have again the fluid inclusion types colored, and I ask you to try and remember with the colors, because the colors will be consistent to the next couple of slides. Then we have a size, the shape, which corresponds to the sample type. I summarized the three, and then the petrographic timing of fluid inclusions, and I want to draw your attention to the biggest size. These are fluid inclusion assemblages which are petrographically associated to copper sulfide mineralization. And what we see in here are dots or data for entire fluid inclusion assemblages. So each data point is not one inclusion, but a number of fluid inclusions, showing the same total salinity expressed in sodium and calcium chloride versus the sodium, the sodic-calcic ratio. And what we see, the main ore fluid is essentially a low salinity fluid dominated by sodium chloride. In contrast, we have the magmatic hydrothermal brine, which is a highly saline brine. It's dominated by sodium chloride, but it's also calcium chloride bearing. And then we have intermediate salinity fluid inclusions as grouped as a sedimentary basin brine. They are roughly, they show about the same sodium, so about 50% sodium and calcium, so the ratio is about 0.5, a bit more. And then we have a rock buffered basin brine, which is really calcium, is a calcium dominated brine. Now we took this microthermometry data and used the sodium chloride as an internal standard to quantify the trace element composition in fluid inclusion. So we shot with the laser the fluid inclusions and measured the trace element composition. And this diagram here shows three main components: copper, uranium, and iron, versus the total salinity, this time in chloride. And what we see is that the main ore fluid is essentially a copper-rich fluid. It's of low salinity, but iron poor. The uranium-rich tells us that it's a very oxidized fluid. So fluids with 40 ppm, they are basically, they have to have seen the surface, so the surface at Earth's surface. This fluid mixes, so what we also see here is, or indicated are mixing lines. This main ore fluid, which is a volcanic lake water, that's an interpretation, but mixes with the sedimentary basin brine, okay, and the magmatic hydrothermal brine. And the magmatic hydrothermal brine contains low amounts of copper and low amounts of uranium, but it is essentially the iron-rich brine. And the sedimentary basin brine contributes some iron and some copper, but it's not the main ore fluid. If we go to the schematic mineralization model of prominent till, then we see here the ore body indicated by this funny shaped bell, okay, and that would mean that the main ore fluid is an oxidized volcanic lake water. It's charged with sulfate, it's charged with copper, it's acidic, and it contains high amounts of uranium. This fluid flows along the unconformity between the sedimentary host rocks and the lavas, okay, and where it mixes with the magmatic hydrothermal brine containing high amounts of iron, you create sort of the hematite breccia ore. So it's a mixing between fluid A, fluid B, and fluid C, which is most likely formation water in the calcareous host rocks. So now I showed this diagram, or this set of people, and the question is now, what is the process that creates the hematite breccia out of these calcareous breccias and interbedded limestone carbonates, interbedded argillite carbonates. So how did the carbonate disappear? And we will discuss this with a bunch of reactions. We'll take it slow and we'll go through it. So that comes to the question, why are iron oxide copper gold deposits iron rich? Okay. And the main thing here is that acid neutralization promotes carbonate and feldspar destructive alteration, while the breccias get enriched in hematite. And I call this the iron oxide pump. So when we have a magmatic hydrothermal fluid or sulfur, so sulfur dioxide, that comes up during volcanic eruptions, and it reacts with oxygen at the atmosphere. From the atmosphere, you create sulfuric acid. So a crater lake fluid, acid, it contains copper, it contains uranium, it's very oxidized, and the sulfate that is created in this environment is key for the hematite precipitation. And we all know what happens when we pour acid over carbonate. Well, it starts to fizz, so it dissolves the carbonate. But now, if we take this main ore fluid, which is sulfate rich, or any sulfate rich fluid, let it react with iron 2+ bearing hydrothermal fluid, then you can create hematite and lots of H+. And the consumption of H+ means you alter the host rock, and if you take this away out of the equation, you drive the equations towards this side. And now, as I told you, we have an oxidized copper-bearing brine, okay? So you have copper plus sulfate plus iron. So like this, you can create hematite and chalcocite. And again, the H+ usage of this reaction will drive the reaction to the right side. Now what happens? That doesn't explain the hematite fracture yet. But if we take these two and react it with, or mix it with the magmatic iron-rich hydrothermal brine and let it react with the carbonates in the host rock, you can create hematite and you sort of destroy the carbonate. The same thing or a similar thing happens when you react the copper-rich brine with pyrite, which sits in the host rock. Okay, what you create is chalcocite, and that's sort of the explanation for the isovolumetric replacement of pyrite that I have shown you. And by this process, the pyrite loses some of its sulfur into sulfate, okay, and into iron. And so this is basically more nutrition to feed back on this reaction. So the more pyrite you have in your host rock, the more hematite you will get, as long as you contribute sulfate and iron 2+. And that's how you can create out of a carbonate fracture, a hematite fracture. So now we have talked a lot about fluids, and now I would like you to draw the attention to the fluorite and how we use fluorite as the indicator mineral of IOCG fluids. So we measured these fluid inclusions, okay, and that's an image showing fluid inclusions which have the chemistry of the main ore fluid, the volcanic lake water. So we know the composition of these fluid inclusions: copper-rich, uranium-rich, iron-poor. And then now we measured the trace element composition of the fluorite and just check how does it look? What does it look like? So we measured these with laser ablation ICP-MS. And the strategy is that we link the composition of the fluorite to the composition of the fluid or to the fluid type. And we used a pretty standard diagram developed 44 years ago by a German researcher called Müller. And so that's basically the diagram, no data, okay? So, but we're gonna plot lots of patterns, rare earth element patterns on this side, and then sort of the fluoride classification diagram on the right side. And the important thing is we have not changed anything to this diagram, which was published 44 years ago. Okay, so what we did, I renamed this from pegmatitic to epithermal. Okay, and this would be the hydrothermal field. So fluoride, which plots in here, has a hydrothermal source, and then fluoride, which plots in the sedimentary field, comes from a sedimentary fluid source. And now we're going to plot fluoride data from fluoride that hosts all 4 fluid types. And this is how it looks like. So we have fluoride in the high-grade breccia matrix from Prominent Hill. They show, some of them show huge amounts of, or they're very enriched in rare earth elements, okay, and the pattern sort of decreases towards the heavy rare earth elements. And they plot in the epithermal or pegmatitic field. What we also see, other fluoride in the hematite breccia matrix shows this bell-shaped pattern. very different from the high-grade ore. And what we see, so this shows the sedimentary brine, and it also, the fluoride also plots in the sedimentary brine field. Okay. Note that this study, what we have done here, was conducted 3 years later than the fluid inclusion study, so it's sort of independent. Fluoride in siderite-bearing veins, they sort of show this pattern, and they plot where they should plot in the hydrothermal field. What we see here in gray are fluoride in the breccia matrix, in the hematite breccia matrix, really deep in the prominent hill deposit. So what it actually means is that the magmatic hydrothermal brine sort of comes from below and creates a fluoride with this signature. It's hydrothermal fluoride, comes from below, but it's not the main mineralizing fluid, which is the main mineralizing or ore fluid is the volcanic lake water. And then the fourth sort of rare earth element pattern shows basically the composition of C1 chondrites, and it is fluoride in late carbonate veins. So these veins, they post-date mineralization, and yeah, they go through the deposit. And they may redistribute some copper, but they're certainly not related to hydrogen mineralization. And unfortunately, we don't have four fields, so we have only 3, but these sort of purple-colored fluoride, they plot along in this field. So now this is all data from Prominent Hill. Now we look at data from Olympic Dam. And what we see here is again the same diagram. So I go back, so I reduced a few lines for clarity, but we see here the hematite breccia that I have shown at the beginning. It's really high grade, okay, 3-point-something% copper, almost a gram per ton gold. So really, this is what we all want to find, or what we all want to mine. We see that the fluoride basically redraws the rare earth element pattern of fluoride from Prominent Hill that contains the volcanic lake water, the main surface-derived ore fluid. Another sample from Olympic Dam, that's a hematite breccia that shows K-feldspar alteration, and sort of redraws the rare earth element pattern of fluoride that's hosted in sediment, in siderite-bearing veins. So remember that there are veins that contain the iron-rich magmatic hydrothermal fluid that comes from below. So that indicates that Olympic Dam, that the high-grade ore involved the same type of fluid, the oxidized surface-derived fluid, which is interpreted in the volcanic lake water. And the iron was most likely also contributed by the magmatic hydrothermal brine, a similar brine that we see at Prominent Hill. Now, the last picture, and it's a magnetite breccia from Ernest Henry, okay? And it's only one sample, but it's an important sample because it basically shows that in this sample, the mineralization was sort of caused by a rock buffer basement brine. And this fluoride in this magnetite breccia shows the same composition as the fluoride in late fluoride-bearing veins. So at Prominent Hill, the late fluoride-bearing veins post-date mineralization, but at Ernest Henry, this fluid, okay, and this rock buffer fluid was part of the mineralization. So what did this actually mean? Okay, so it means that different IOCG deposits form by different fluid types. Okay, and we have seen most of the diagram already, but this is sort of the summary diagram which wraps up everything or summarizes everything but what I said about alteration. So here are the 3 block models that I have been showing. We're not discussing IOA deposits that contain some iron oxide copper gold veins. But for example, this diagram also indicates that IOCG deposits can form in different tectonic environments. And depending on the tectonic environment, you also create different alteration shells around your deposit. So at Prominent Hill, you would have the volcanic lake water in the Gala Range volcanics. You sort of have this fluid and you mix it with the iron-rich fluid to create Prominent Hill, the hematite, copper-bearing hematite breccia Prominent Hill. Whereas at Ernest Henry, you would have a more rock-buffered brine that possibly contributes copper, mixing with the magmatic hydrothermal brine, which is published in other literature. And that's, with this brings me to the summary. So the involvement of 4 fluid types are now constrained in, the involvement of 4 fluid types in IOCG mineralization is confirmed by multiple studies. So that's alteration, that's fluid inclusion studies, and now the fluoride by mineral indicator studies. Then we see variable iron oxide alkali calcic alteration patterns in different IOCG districts. We have shown that fluoride rare earth element chemistry tracks the IOCG ore fluid types, and this is really important. Okay? If you explore for IOCG deposit, please consider the diversity. Don't lock yourself in some of the published research articles that try to explain all IOCG deposit by one sort of mineralization. And because the broader implication of this fluoride study is that global IOCG deposits do not form by a single sequence of processes. That was it. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to take questions. I think I stop sharing now, right? I give back to an overall to someone else for questions.
Okay. That was an excellent presentation. Thank you very much, Dr. Schiegel.
You're welcome.
I remember about 4 years ago when you showed me that samples. That was very interesting, although I never seen that kind of mineralization. As Dr. Arif said before, this is an unconventional deposit type in Indonesia. Okay, now we're going to the next session, question and answer. Please raise your hand or write down your question in the Zoom group chat. Okay, anybody would like to ask? Maybe? Yeah.
Okay, it seems a very difficult topic for us. Us is not familiar with this kind of deposit. However, I have a question particularly for the gold department, Tobias.
Yep.
As in your title, iron oxide copper gold deposit, it should be any gold present there over there, in my opinion. Then the question is, how is the gold department actually? Gold department, is this like, so I didn't see any explanation about the gold occurrences in the department. Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
So the study we have done is mainly focused on copper. And so I have not particularly paid much attention to gold, but if I share, I don't need to share it, but basically what we see is, with plan view, okay, you have the hematite quartz alteration here, and the gold sort of sits in this hematite quartz alteration, mainly within, so at the immediate boundary to the aluminosilicate stable hematite breccia. So that means still in the hematite quartz breccia, where it's hosted in the matrix, but also in barite bearing veins, and the highest grade are sort of idealized at the immediate boundary to the hematite quartz, a hematite aluminosilicate breccia, and then just next to the copper, the high grade ore and the high grade copper ore occurs. There's sort of a
Okay.
zonal distribution between gold in the center.
Oh. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Tobias.
Okay. Anybody else would like to ask? Yeah, I think this is the topics for us, Pak Arif.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I would like to ask, I'm interested in exploration perspective.
Yeah.
In the system, rock covering is the important process from your presentation material before. The question is, which type of rock or host rock will more effective for this process of mineralization? Is that volcanic, sedimentary, or metamorphic rock?
I mean, several studies, not only mine, have shown that the host rock actually is not really important. So because several IOCG, so for example, Prominent Hill is hosted in dominantly sedimentary host rocks. Okay, Ernest Henry is hosted in a cave feldspar bearing breccia. Okay, so lavas or volcanic rocks, etc. Olympic is hosted in a granite breccia. So what is a big difference? Because all these deposits form in these fluids, in this rock environment. What, in my opinion, what is important is the host rock permeability. So the permeability structure of the host rock, because a key characteristic is that IOCG deposits form in breccias. Okay, so the host rock permeability takes, or it can be shown that it controls the distribution of copper in, for example, at Prominent Hill. And so it is not necessarily the composition of the host rock or the type, but the permeability structure. And of course, you can have a good host rock or a good permeability structure, but without any sulfur, okay, you don't make an economic deposit. So it is really key that for Prominent Hill, it was really key that the host rock contains pyrite or early pyrite. And then this pyrite, this sulfur, is sort of used up by the copper-bearing fluid, creating chalcocite and bornite by replacement of pyrite. So, so the type of host rock is not really important as long as it is permeable and it contains pyrite. Then you will create a larger deposit.
Okay. Anybody else? We have about 15 minutes.
There's no question.
Don't be shy.
Okay, Pak Taski. You can ask him directly, Pak
Okay,
Taski.
thank you, Pak Tobi. This is very great presentation, yeah. But I never have experience before to see the field, and then I have some question. Is that what is the clear differences with the sediment hosted, or anything that you can suggest to us, because I'm a field exploration. So is that the IOCG? We see that is as a breccia, and then it has sediment or bedding control, and then it's have hematite as the class and matrix sulfide. Is that if we found the lithology like that or the characteristic like that, so we can presume that this is the IOCG, because our interpretation will be lead us to the next area of exploration. That's the first question. But and the second is, what is the difference with the sediment hosted mineralization? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's an excellent question. Okay, and much of these similarity or differences, they still need to be established. Okay, I'm not an expert in sediment-hosted copper deposits, so my knowledge from that is basically, you know, textbook knowledge. But from what I know is the current model, I think most accepted model for sediment-hosted copper deposits is that you have an oxidized fluid, okay, that sort of meets pyrite in more reduced host rocks. So that's sort of the standard model from what I know. So, and this has actually quite a bit of similarity to prominent hill, for example, to iron oxide copper mineralization, because prominent hill also precipitating copper sulfides by replacement of pyrite in sort of more reduced rocks. Okay, although the tectonic setting might be very different, there is certainly, in terms of process model or understanding how mineralization works, there's quite a bit of similarity. A difference might be the influence of the magmatic hydrothermal fluid that contains lots of iron, which is evident from IOCG deposits, from several IOCG deposits. But from what I know, it's not very present in sediment-hosted copper deposits, so the SSC type. So yes, there are similarities in terms of the main ore fluid being in a very oxidized fluid, and also in terms of mineralization processes by replacement of pyrite in the host rock. But the difference is probably that for IOCGs, you need multiple fluids, and for sediment-hosted copper deposits, possibly not.
Can we use the like the element, or maybe the it's like the uranium, and then maybe I don't, maybe you can suggest, okay, you can
studies out there that have established that, but it seems like that IOCG deposits, the common thing is that they really show these zone alteration envelopes, and possibly finding IOCG mineralization or narrowing it down means or translates into reading the alteration footprint. That's what I would sort of suggest. And I'm not sure whether, or it comes back to your last question, I'm not sure whether there is a very well developed hydrothermal footprint in sediment-hosted copper deposits.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Pak Tobias. This is very nice discussion. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Terima kasih Pak Tatski. Anybody would like to ask?
I'm asking about the what do you think in your perspective, Tobias, about the potential of IOCG in Indonesia? As I have been read one paper that written by the Chinese guys that in the one of journal, I just forget it, that the presence of the possible presence of IOCG in Kalimantan Island. Yeah. So what do you think from the tectonic setting point of view, in your opinion, about the potential of IOCG in Indonesia?
Okay, first I have to say I'm not very familiar with the geology of Indonesia. Okay, so, but what I know that big parts of Indonesia sits above a subducting slab. Okay, that's what I've sort of.
Yeah.
I hope that goes along with what you have, and that's a setting where you also it's possibly a setting. I'm not saying it is the same setting, but possibly a setting that's possibly similar to Chile. Okay, so that Chile has also a subduction zone. Okay, and then you have volcanism, and there's quite a few IOCG deposits also in Chile. And so the tectonic setting, on my interpretation, would sort of show at least a similar sort of broad-scale tectonic setting. But if you look at my last diagram that I showed, or if you remember it, so the distribution of alteration patterns in this iron oxide apatite plus minus IOCG vein type, which is established from ELACO basically, okay, and shows that the alteration is very different. So I would personally not expect an Olympic dam or a prominent hill type alteration envelope in Indonesia. Possibly it's more like, related to volcanism and basins next to volcanism, which may feed them oxidized sedimentary brines into a favorable host rock, for example. But that's big. Lots of fantasy involved. But I personally don't see a problem why Indonesia should not be prospective for IOCG deposits. But on the other hand, there is quite a bit of research done on the magma composition that's related to IOCG-like mineralization, and I'm not sure whether you have the same magma types or stuff like that. So the broad scale, let's say the broad scale tectonic architecture might be similar, but in detail might be a bit different. But as I said, I'm not an expert on Indonesian geology.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Maybe next time you have to test your expertise to look for ICG in Indonesia. So not just like offer from Germany to Australia. Okay. Okay, thanks.
Looking with the headlights to the window. That would be nice, but I don't know. I mean, I hope that you or someone else are finding IOCGs in Indonesia in the future.
Okay, maybe Pak Dunan will ask something, please. Pak Dunan.
Oke, terima kasih Pak.
Unmute, ya.
Hi Tobias, how are you, Pak?
Thank you.
I have some question regarding the IOCG, especially why is the IOCG occurs in the oil formation? For example, in the Australia actually occur in the Archean formation, and the second, so common is in ICG we found uranium. This is my question.
I'm sorry, I did not really understand your question. Can you repeat it again?
The first is why is IOCG occur in the oil formation, like in Australia, it's Archean formation.
Yeah.
Do you know Archean?
Archean, the time.
Archean, yeah, Archean. Yeah. And the second is common is we found uranium in the ICG.
Okay. Yeah. So first the second part. So uranium is not common in all IOCGs, but okay, the biggest of them all, Olympic Dam, is essentially, or could be turned into giving favorable economic conditions, blah, 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 is essentially one of the biggest uranium deposits on the planet, okay? Or in fact, probably the biggest, I'm not sure. It's something you will have to ask other people. But so Olympic Dam contains sub-economic to economic uranium contents. Prominent Hill contains, is enriched in uranium, but as far as I know, it is not mined for uranium. And in other IOCG deposits, they lack on uranium. So yeah, that's sort of gives you the answer. Again, variability, okay? Variability in mineralization, variability in alteration, variability in fluids, etc. To the first part of the question, most IOCG deposits in the Gawler Craton are actually hosted by hypothetical Zurich rocks, not Archean rocks. So 1730, Wallaroo, meta sediments. Some prospects are hosted in all the rocks as well, but as I said at the beginning, the host rock age or the host in the Gawler Craton, the host rock composition probably plays a minor role for mineralization, except that you need, or you preferably have pyrite in the host rock, but the age is not that important.
Okay, Pak.
Because
Thank you, Pak.
the
Actually, I have been in the
mineralization,
prominent hill.
if I comment, the mineralization, I mean, they did not say this during the talk, okay? The commonly accepted mineralization age for IOCG mineralization in the Gawler Craton is something like between 16 and 1580, okay? So the boundary between Paleo and Mesoproterozoic age. So the driver for mineralization is sort of these large igneous provinces creating the Hiltaba sweet granites and the Gawler range volcanics. And this age is the age spans between let's say 16, if I remember correctly, 1600 to 1580, something like that. And so obviously mineralization is sort of post-dating the Hiltaba age slightly, because Olympic Dam sits in Hiltaba age host rocks, so the Roxby-Downs granite is Hiltaba age, and it contains the mineralogy or the mineralization, so it has to be there already, right? And at prominent hill, the host rocks are meta-sedimentary or sedimentary rocks which are older than the Gawler range volcanics. But again, Gawler range volcanics are involved or as host rocks as well. So the timing between the development of the large igneous province and the actual mineralization cannot be too far apart. But yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Okay, Pak. Thank you, Pak, for your explanation. Actually, I've been in the prominent hill last 2008, and also I saw some name you read in your paper, like Stuart Master, Marcus Tompkison, and also maybe Miss Freeman. Okay, please pass my regard to them, Pak. Thank you, Pak.
Okay. Any question? Another question, maybe? If we have no more question, this topic or presentation today really proof that IOCG is unconventional deposit type in Indonesia. We have not familiar yet with the type. Okay, Dr. Sleo, once again, thank you very much for your excellent presentation and discussion. Thanks for sharing your knowledge, which is very useful for us. Hopefully this presentation and discussion will giving us a new understanding on IOCG deposits and the possibility of its occurrences in Indonesia. I'll give back to Pak Arif. Maybe we'll give a closing speech before we close this meeting. Or you can close it.
Okay, Mbak Ocha, maybe is there any Mbak Ocha there?
Mbak Ocha left.
Left. Okay. Oh, I think Mbak Ocha is still over there. Okay. However, okay. Well, again, Tobias, thank you very much for your sharing knowledge today in this evening, in afternoon in Indonesia, and we really get a lot of point from you, and then maybe to be most of the participant attendance present here actually coming from the industry, from companies. So maybe this is useful for them. Yeah, of course, from scientific point of view, this is very benefit for us. Many things unknown to be learned. Yeah, in the future, particularly for Indonesia, I think still many mystery about the deposit type present in here. Not only talking about porphyry, skarn, and epithermal, but I think it is possible to find another type of deposit. We hope, yeah. So open our mind. So, okay, again, thank you very much for Tobias again. And what time here? What time there in Australia now?
It's now 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock.
Six.
Yeah.
So evening. So in the night. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much again, and enjoy your stay in Australia, and hope we get another publication from you in the next days. Okay. And now, thank you very much for your leading the presentation from Tobias today, and also lead the discussion. And also, of course, thank you very much for everybody who already present in this presentation in this afternoon. Okay, I think on behalf of the MGEI, so Mr. STJ Budi Santoso cannot present in this occasion, and he sends greetings for you. Then I say many thanks for that. Okay, I think that's all from me. Yes, thank you very much, everybody, and we will meet in the next webinar. Baucha over there. Okay, so I back to Baucha, please, to close the session.
Thank you, Mr. Tobias. Maybe the participant will ask about the presentation. Tobias, yeah. Mr. Tobias, could you share the presentation maybe through Pak Ernowo or Pak Arif Idrus, maybe in email? So maybe we could share to the all participants for the presentation. If we could share, if confidential, maybe you could tell to us that you can share.
I can definitely make a PDF out of it. That's possible. But I would ask not to share it. Like if you made a recording, I would ask you not to share it online. That would be great, because CSIRO policy would mean that we need to translate everything, right? So like written stuff. So I'm happy to send you the PDF of the presentation. But we cannot share it like as a YouTube, unfortunately. If that's okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Tobias.
Okay, thank you so much, Pak Tobias. Thank you, Pak Ernowo. Thank you, Pak Arif Idrus. And thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. Stay safe. Keep healthy. Namaste.
Okay.
Hey, Toby.
Yeah.
When will you come to Bandung?
Well, if I can leave Western Australia, then I would like to come, yeah? At the moment, it's a bit, it's not possible.
Yeah, we are waiting for you.
When are you coming to Australia? I don't know.
Indonesia is banned until December because of Corona.
Yeah, that's a common thing, right? Everyone is banned from traveling.
Yeah.
That's how it is.
Maybe Pak Arif and me will go to Aachen next year, if possible.
Oh, nice. Nice. Yeah, that's good. I mean, that's good. So you're gonna go measure some stuff, or?
Yeah.
Nice.
We will meet Roman for EPMA, ya, Pak Arif.
Yes, hopefully. Yeah. If not, Germany the COVID not extended.
But maybe they have installed new LA ICP-MS, yeah? I think Toby installed it.
Yeah, they have. Yeah. So much of the fluoride that we measured was actually shot in Aachen with the new laser ablation ICTMS system. So actually, not all, but some of. So that the fluoride was shot in Helsinki with Thomas's former lab, and then the second part of the fluoride was shot in Aachen. So that the machine is up and running in Aachen. Yeah.
Okay.
He's now very well equipped, Thomas, with pretty much everything you can dream of.
So who always go for lunch with him if we are not there?
Yeah, well, I went quite a bit to lunch with him, yeah, when you were not there anymore, but yeah. I think they're doing good, but yeah, just call them and try. If you can go, it would be nice, right? Then you get some cool measurements done and then good publications. That would be nice. I'm sure he's happy, but I don't know. I mean, I cannot speak for him, but yeah.
Yeah, but don't worry that because it's still another Tobias over there in Aachen.
Yeah. I think what he told me was that I'm not sure whether he's actually in the office. So whenever I talk to him, not very often, but like once every 2 months or so, or once every month, then he's in home office. So how do you teach? Do you teach in class, Arif, or do you?
No, actually, we totally not come to campus. So we teach online. Yeah, I think so. We will also extend it for next semester. Yeah, we don't know when it will be stopped, but we are happy. We are happy teaching from home.
Yeah, but it's lots of work, right, to prepare everything for video conference and stuff, right?
So like urlaub, never-ending urlaub.
Never-ending urlaub. Good for you.
Yes. Advantage.
I mean, it was probably a lot of work to bring everything online, right? I mean, I cannot imagine. I don't give classes, so I can imagine lots of work to put everything online.
Yeah.
All right.
Boleh tanya ke Tobi?
Halo Pak Ewa, ya.
Ya.
Mas Ewa.
Mas Ewa baru muncul. Another Australian, Pak Mas Ewa.
Yeah. Tobi, is there any chance I can have your contact number or email address, or I can ask you if sometimes
Yeah. I mean, you can find me easy. So it's going to be at the end of the presentation that I share with you. But you can also ask and write me a question. The thing is pretty simple. Tobias.Schiegel@CSIRO.au.
Oh, okay. Yep, easy then.
And then you drop me an email, and that's fine. No worries.
We have already the email address from Tobias. So we will share you if you need it.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. Mas Iwa still in Brisbane?
No, I'm located in Perth.
Okay, sorry.
Perth is Perth is very isolated. So on the left side, if you look north, you have the Indian Ocean, and on the right side, the Great Indian Desert. But it's nice here, I have to say. Usually in summer the weather is great. Okay, the beaches are great. The only thing what I miss are the mountains. That's how it is.
Okay. Masih di Brisbane, Mas Ewa?
Yeah, I'm still in Brisbane.
Okay. Yeah.
Just wondering when you and Ernovo can come to Brisbane again.
Yeah. We have been meet you in Brisbane a few years ago, Pak Mas Ewa, ya?
Yeah, I think back in 2013.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right.
Are you working for a company or at the university?
Yeah. I work in the coal company. in Owen Basin.
Yeah. Nice. So did you like the talk? Was it sort of clear?
Yeah, sometimes. Sometimes.
Okay. Yeah, you know, my English skills sometimes are a bit difficult, but yeah, I hope that the main points came through. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, just keep on talk. I have to leave. Sorry, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, Tobias, thank you very much again, and
Thank you,
see
Ali, for
you
the invitation. Yep.
anytime.
Thank you
Yes.
very much, Mr.
Okay.
Tobias.
Enjoy your time there. Sorry.
I will. Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm gonna have dinner, I think. All right.
Okay.
So to all the participants, thanks a lot for having me. It was a great opportunity to give this talk with your Society of Economic Indonesian Society of Economic Geologists. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you very much, Toby.
We keep in touch, right? And all.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
See you. Bye.
Oke, mungkin Bapak Ibu, saya juga harus leave ini. Silahkan kalau masih mau di sini. Terima kasih banyak, saya leave.
Makasih Mas Nowo.
Mas Ewa, matur nuwun, nanti kontak-kontak.
Sami-sami, nggih.
Ini juga biar setiap materinya. Tambah lagi di sini terus. Tadi sih marah-marah nih.
Ngapain ikut? Ini kok nggak boleh. Selesai mini tadi? Selesai mainan Umi. Iya. Ketika gue di rumah gak dicek. Sekarang guys, temen-temen gue bangun. Apaan tuh? Tadi apa kata Sandina ini?